But what this comes down to is now there's a lot of people going in and out of organizations that there never has been before. And so there's such a volume here that we wanted to take some time and really understand what does that life cycle look like, and kind of how do we make it much more manageable as you're adapting to this great hiring market that we're seeing. And with that component, you essentially are now taking this physical version of yourself, kind of this physical identity, and now moving into this digital identity. And so how do you gain access to all the different resources that these new digital identities coming into the organization need to get their jobs done? And what does that transition look like, and making sure that you're looking after it? So for the first section, we kind of want to look at this from the onboarding experience of the employees themselves. And so as you're thinking about this holistic experience, you know, it's interesting kind of to pull out, what does this look like? So actually only 12% say that organizations do this really well, right? So already there is a gap that can be covered within the market. And then even then, as you bring on great talent, about a fifth of that's going to fall out anyway within the first quarter. And so you're always constantly trying to have folks come throughout that organization. So very quick onboarding and offboarding. And then every time you do that too, there's a cost associated to it. So not only is there kind of, you know, time intensive, but there's a transactional cost of making sure you bring on great talent. So this is an important kind of lifeblood to the organization as you bring on different folks and their resources. But if you do this well, there is a great opportunity to essentially retain talent at a much higher margin. And so for those, it's kind of a little bit more of a self-serving, right? It's making sure that it's not constantly a leaky boat, and you have great employees staying with the organization. So that way, all you're really doing is kind of managing and maintaining and understanding the access as they evolve with the organization over time. And it's not so much kind of a quick in and out, but we want to make sure that we have practical tips throughout each one of those different scenarios. And the reason why this is important too is if you want to think about this from a productivity standpoint, people have an uptime as well, right? And so not only from the very beginning, as you're transitioning that physical identity into the digital version of themselves, you're also giving them access through that digital identity into the different areas and components of their role. And that changes over time. And so anytime that you kind of run into friction and other pieces, you know, people have a downtime around that. And so we want to make sure that our processes are aligned with how those folks are getting that work done.
Right. So when we look at the identity lifecycle, we're looking at these particular stages in front of you. So one, you have to create this digital identity. So whether that digital identity is born in an HR system or in your directory itself, you need to have that fully fleshed identity that allows you to then assign the proper access to all of the IT resources that identity will need to use to start getting work done. And in order to actually have that access, we also need to provision that identity to every resource that sits downstream of your directory service. So whether that's a device, an application, a radius server, whatever it may be, you've got to provision that identity. Then you have to manage it, ensuring that that user is in good standing, that they maintain proper access as that user changes, as their role might evolve, or as the organization changes. And then offboarding, of course. So everybody has their tenure, and what you want to make sure of is the day that that employee or that user departs your organization, protecting your organization's vital data and resources by making sure that that user loses access appropriately. So these are the lifecycle stages that we're going to be talking through today. There we go. So when we talk about creating this digital identity, it's going to vary within every organization. So some smaller orgs may have an HR department, may not. But whomever does the hiring in your environment, you want to make sure that when they're bringing this candidate in, you're gathering the right information about that candidate, about that new employee or end user. And the information that is most vital is probably going to be that information about that user that's going to help make decisions about what they need access to and what levels of access they need. So John's going to get deeper into that in a moment, but you want to make sure you're collecting those appropriate attributes, that they're accurate. And then you need to create a system for translating those identities from that HR function to your directory, your IT directory that you're using to for IAM purposes or what have you. So ideally, if you have an enterprise level HR system of record in use, creating a direct API level integration to your directory service is going to give you a really clean, real-time, hey, this user's created, and they flow directly into your directory. And that allows your IT system to get that user up and running very quickly, right? There's no manual entry. So ideally, you're looking for that API level integration and a real-time sync. That's not possible for everyone. So, there are still ways to leverage APIs through automation if you have access to that. Import tools are also available on most of the directories that you see. So whether that's importing from CSV or from another directory manually, and making sure that you do that on a regular cadence so that you're catching those users as soon as they are created. But basically, you need a systematized method for handing over that user data from wherever they are born into your directory system. And even if that is a form, I've talked to some IT admins that, their IT managers input a form and it lands on their desk. But whatever your method of creating this user, you want to make sure that you have that accurate data and that you maintain accuracy of that data upon import. And you also want to make sure that those that you're working with in your organization to onboard your users understand and are all on the same page around what the onboarding workflow will be. Okay, so talk about that end user experience. What emails are they going to get from what systems? How are you going to get them logged in and connected to that virtual identity? So, if you're working with multiple tools, you want to make sure that you've decided how you want those relationships between tools to interact with your end user to ensure that everybody's on the same page and no piece of the communication is dropped as you get that user into your IT tools. So again, wherever your user is coming from, having it directly pull into that centralized directory service is going to be very important.
So let's talk a little bit about authorization and really the surrounding principle of least privilege access. So some practical tips to think about at this stage is, one, a practice we deem really important here at JumpCloud, and it's to maintain a access control matrix. So think across your company, documenting departments, the roles within each department, the permission levels that those users need, even down to specific application requirements. So this practice will help ensure users are not overprivileged. So some examples to think about: you don't want a junior software developer having full admin privileges to your production AWS account, as an example. So diligent work on this access control matrix will make sure that employees have the correct access to do their job, but they're not overprivileged. So following that principle of least privilege access. Some further, hopefully practical tips on the authorization component is your ability to define attribute values for these roles, which can really help aid in automation. And as Lindsay mentioned, this can actually even stem from the beginning HR process. So when an identity provider can pass along attribute information on a user to the end, application or service provider, this can help drop employees in the right role, right permissions without that manual step. So hopefully a practical tip there. Further, just really kind of company communication and something that we find really useful is setting up a reoccurring cadence with department leaders. As organizations are growing, teams are changing, reporting structure, it's good to have a repeating cadence to make sure that you understand what applications departments are using, roles, permission levels. So look for someone who has great attention to detail in each of these departments. Could be conducted as often as once a month or a cadence you see relevant. So those are some practical tips on the authorization component.
So once you've decided what access users should have, before you can provide that access, you really need to think about how you're going to translate that identity. So one of the benefits of having a directory service in place is that it is going to allow you to centralize a lot of your user management activities, and ideally all of them, right? But in order to do that, you need to think through how you want to automate and how you can best automate the transition of that identity from that directory to each of your different endpoints. So you're going to be managing different types of endpoints, but common ones, right? You have your device. How do you get that identity managed on your device? A Radius server. Applications is one of the most pervasive places where we are going to need to push out and manage identities. So I want to speak specifically about that a little bit. There are a couple of different protocols that have become really popular over the past couple of years. And when you look at SSO as a service, you'll see these protocols called out quite often. And those are protocols that create identities and manage those identities within applications, SaaS applications. SCIM is one of them. So SCIM has the ability to create, update, and really delete or manage that identity on applications in pretty much real time. It's an API level integration. You'll also see SAML just-in-time provisioning. So SAML is known as an auth protocol, but it does have the ability to basically carry on an insertion all of the data around a user that is needed to create that user account when they first go to log in. There may be custom API integrations available as well in different tools, and just ensuring that something of that nature is available is going to be useful. And then where it's possible, or rather where SAML and SCIM and custom API integrations do not exist, there's always the option to leverage LDAP as an alternative directory. So LDAP is popular for that purpose. It's a well-known schema that a lot of apps can use to authenticate users against without necessarily needing an identity store of their own. So for apps, just making sure that, if you're supporting 20 or 40 applications across your organization, having the identity creation automated is going to take a lot off of your plate. As part of those integrations, we've talked a lot about attributes. So attributes can be used to decide what authorization is provided from JumpCloud, or sorry, this is my world, right? From JumpCloud or from your directory. But it could also be carried down into that app. John mentioned this. And when, say, a role is passed down to a certain application, there may be automation that takes place on that application. AWS is a prime example. They have their own ABAC system that can apply roles based on the attributes that your directory is passing. So ensuring that you have the right data being passed down on those users to facilitate as much automation around roles or permissions on those downstream resources is going to pay dividends. So there could be, if you think about the environment, and Chase, if you can click again, any single user could have as many as, 13 or more. This was just kind of a popular number of accounts. And what you don't want is them or you as an IT manager to have to go and manage all of those accounts on every single server and all of those 13 credentials. Instead, you want to find a directory service that, Chase, if you can click again, it'll help you wrangle it, right? Like, it can be the Wild West, and whatever method you need to use to take control of the many applications that are out there in the wild in your org, the better. You're protecting your proprietary information. So, and here's just kind of this benefits again. That identity is created, they come in with fully attributed, and then ideally, because of who they are, their access is determined, and then you can make decisions and push those identities directly out to those endpoints. And having that all automated, again, takes out some of the guesswork. It also eliminates the possibility for access to fall through the cracks. So it's your first day as a new employee and you're just trying to get through your day. I imagine we've all experienced this, but I can't because I don't have access to this. Oh, should I have access to this? So instead of slowing down the onboarding experience with having to answer all of those questions and provide the access one-off, you also get the gains of ensuring that everybody has what they need to get going day one.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.